Okay, Kyle, here's a bold claim, and I was thinking about this the other day. We meet with math educators every single day. We meet with math leaders every single day to talk about what their pebbles are in their shoe. That's the phrase we toss around probably the most here on this podcast and in our daily work supporting educators and leaders across North America. But here's the bold claim. All right. The bold claim is that this question is the most fundamental question in math education. And I want to hear whether you think this is a bold claim. I know this isn't coming. Like you haven't heard this one yet. So I want to hear like your thought, but this is a bold claim that we've been floating around with our district partners and a question that we continually ask. Now we always ask what is the pebble in your shoe? Like that's a great question, but this question I think is the more fundamental question for all levels of educators right now. Here it is. Does it work? And that's the question. Like, does it work? And so what I mean by that, it's like, that sounds like, what do you mean, does it work? It's like, I think the does it work question is something that we probably as educators ask ourselves every single day, but not really think about it that way. So for example, like as a classroom teacher for 19 years, probably every single day I walked out of that classroom and I was like, well, that didn't work or that worked. And it's like, that lesson worked. And it's like the real question, like the fundamental question is, does it work? And how do I know that worked? Because it gets at such the heart of so many things in education versus PD planning, from assessment with students to lesson planning, like it's everything. I think is like we continually go, is that working? Is that not working? And it's like the why I think it's such a bold claim or a fundamental question that we're not really addressing is that we ask it, but no one's like, there's books written on this works and that doesn't work. But it's like, are we asking that to ourselves every day and trying to get to the bottom of like whether this worked or not?
I love it. You're zooming in on something. So you're talking about a very fundamental question here, and you're applying it to math specifically and education specifically. And, so you're kind of zoomed in, and I want to just like zoom way out for a second. And I want you to think about the same question in everything we do in life, right? Like if there is a potential problem that we're looking to solve, essentially you're asking yourself, whether you explicitly ask yourself this question or not, it's ultimately at the end of the day, we're going to try to solve problems with things that we at least suspect are going to work to help you address that problem. So when you think about it, this fundamental idea is something that in nature, we're essentially applying it all the time. But I think what I'm really liking about this discussion and how we can zoom back in on education in a math class is if we're more explicit about it and more intentional about it, right? So you're doing these things anyway. And, I've heard you say this before. It's like, it's very obvious when we can walk out of a room and go, wow, that didn't work, right? Like we know when it didn't work, but sometimes we fail to pay enough attention to when it does work. We might address it and say, you know what, that did seem to work. But more importantly is, what about it worked? What about it didn't work? And is the whole thing a quote unquote failure, right? We look at failure, you're failing forward, you're learning, but you're only learning if you take that experience when you walk out and go, whoa, that didn't go as planned. When we walk out and we go, why not? What about that could we do differently next time? Is this just a complete, throw it out and never, light a match and walk away? Or is there actually some things, like I'm sure that before going into the lesson or before going into your district-wide planning session or before you planned that big district-wide PD session that you did and then got terrible feedback from the participants, I'm sure ahead of time there was something there you thought would work. So now the real question is, where did we not hit the mark there? Like, how do we take that and how do we use that and not beat ourselves up over it, but rather analyze it? And the same's true when you walk out of a session, you get all 10 out of 10s, right? Everyone's like, that was the best PD session I've ever been in. The question becomes, Why? Because we don't want to leave it to chance, right? We talk about that all the time. And it's like the only way that we're not rolling the dice for the next one to either be amazing again or crash and burn or anywhere in between is if we take that time to pause and go, what about it worked or what about it didn't work?
When you said that, like, you got that negative feedback on a session, I was going to say, like, all the sessions that I've ever seen the feedback on, it's always like neutral. It's like, so then it's like, how do you tell? It's like maybe that method of grabbing, the information wasn't the valid method. And it's like what you're saying and what I'm hearing you say is like the does it work question. We do need to think about this systematically. We do need to think of it scientifically in a way. And we're math educators. Like people listening to this are math educators planning for math education. And they, maybe have, that scientific thought like rolling around in there, being like, how can I be intentional about what I want to measure about this lesson, this PD session, this program that I'm putting into place, this curriculum that I want to choose for my math educators, like these things. So like, how can we be very intentional about knowing whether this worked or not? Like we often talk about like, and this is true in the math class, but also if you're planning for PD and supporting teachers like in a one-on-one coaching, it's like if you want to see change, then you got to measure the change. Like we want to see that growth in our classroom. This is why we completely redesigned our assessment practices, you and me, 10 years ago, to measure and see and reward growth in what we saw from the students, because we saw that we were like, look, I want to make sure I can see the change. I want to know our lessons worked. And I'm going to go, okay, that worked because I saw change from here to here. And that's where our growth days really came from. It's about creating a situation that allowed us to make it work, see what we were after. We had that intentionality. And I don't know if this popped into my brain and it really has to pertain to like thinking about, okay, if I want to know if something worked or didn't work, how do I go about doing that? And it reminded me of I think it was in Switch. We've talked about Switch here, but I think it was in a couple other books. Like I think it's a common story or anecdote when talking about measuring for change or creating change or creating or fix to a problem. And it was this story about like in World War II, the bombers, and the bombers would, fly on the mission, like, I'm thinking of the movie Memphis Belle, or the new show out about Masters of Air. Like the bombers would leave from the base and fly hundreds of miles, drop bombs, turn around and come back. And not all of them would come back. Right. Like but what happened was for a while, the generals, the leaders, the equipment people on the ground that never went out, when these bombers would come back, they would look at all the bullet holes in the bottom of the bomber. They'd be like, look, it got, it got shot here, it shot here, it shot here. They're seeing all the bullet holes. And somebody said, like, we got to reinforce those bullet holes. Like, we got to make sure we put on extra armor there, because if they get shot there, we don't want that bullet hitting there. We want it to bounce off there. And they would send them out. And then the same number of bombers were coming back. Like, it didn't create the change that they were after, like finding like that one thought, be like, I'm going to test this. I'm going to put reinforcement on these bullet holes. And somebody else, and they came back and like, you know what? We've been thinking about this wrong. It's not the bullet holes that we should be covering up with extra armor. It's all the places where there's no bullet holes, because those are the ones that it's likely that this one came back. It survived when we hit that spot. When that bullet hit that spot, the plane's here. It came back. It didn't crash. It's likely, though, that if it hit somewhere else, and that's why we're not seeing the planes back here. We don't see the planes that crashed. So let's patch all the places the bullet holes are not showing. And it's like, let's reinforce those spots, because clearly those spots, when they're getting hit, they're crashing. And now it's like, in really when I think about math education and in decision making, it's like, what are we not seeing? And if I want to see change, and I want to see change in my classroom with my students, what are the ghost spots? What are the hidden spots that are like you think this, but it's like, wait a minute. What about reinforcing these areas that often get overlooked and misunderstood?
I love that. That's a great analogy. And it really, for me, kind of brings it all together when I'm thinking about, they had good intentions, right? These folks working on the planes, right? They're going, okay, we're going to make this better. But think about how much we do that in education and mathematics specifically, where we're all trying to make things better. But imagine if we're working on the wrong things. And sometimes we do a lot of work on the wrong things. I know I've done it. I know you've done it. I know a lot of the district leaders that we work with are doing it and have done that. And it doesn't mean we're bad people. It doesn't mean we don't know quite a bit or bring a lot of expertise to the table. But, the big takeaway is that if we're not pausing to reflect and really analyze what's going on and what we're actually trying to address, and then finding a way to measure that. And it's interesting because you would think right away, it makes perfect sense that you're going, oh my gosh, like these planes that did come back, like why are we trying to fix the areas that survived when in reality, we need to fix something completely different. And the problem is, and this is, I think the same is true here in math education, is that a lot of these other issues that are going on oftentimes are very difficult for us to see initially, right? So this is where planning, focusing on those plans, but then also measuring in order to guide the next steps is so key, because if we just keep on making a plan and putting it in place and then making another plan and putting it in place, it's the spaghetti at the wall technique, and who knows what's going to stick or why it's stuck. That's the other piece that I think is really, really challenging. So, for me, the big takeaway, I hope folks that are listening, is asking ourselves, did it work? Why did it work? Or do we think it's going to work? And why do we think it's going to work? Or if we think it's not going to work, why do we think it's not going to work? So these are the questions that if we keep it fairly fundamental and very basic principle like, and continually remind ourselves to just ask those questions, I think you're going to find that you'll end up going further down that rabbit hole to better identify the true challenges that you're trying to help address, instead of trying to fix these massive ones that are obvious to see, but very difficult for us to solve with any one specific action.
Yeah. And we talked about assessment being one of those things that you want to take a hard look at on, like, what is it that you're really assessing? What is it that we're really measuring to see if things work? But, to talk about that, reinforcing where the bullet holes aren't, and thinking, are we working on the wrong things? Can we share, like, what are the most impactful things we can do as educators to create, the environments that we want in our classrooms, to strengthen up, our coaching programs with teachers. Like we've talked a lot about those things with leaders and educators. And a lot of the times that hidden part is our own strength around the proficiency of mathematics for ourselves versus our pedagogy. And I wanted to kind of leave it with, this thought, is because it's like a ton of time is spent going like, let's put this routine into place. Let's focus on this pedagogical move. Let's focus on, this classroom structure. Let's get this curriculum, these are all like the bullet holes, in my opinion. And these are all the things like, we're going to strengthen those bullet hole areas up. But the parts where that's like, in order for those other pieces to like really work well and to be strong at, we have to take a hard look at that hidden thing, that non-bullet hole reinforcement, which is, where are we? Like, how comfortable do we feel doing mathematics the way we want our students to be doing mathematics? So if I want to like use the area model for multiplication, if I want to use a double number line, am I using that myself regularly? And do I feel comfortable multiplying using that technique or that model and the strategies I want? Like we all want these routines and these strategies in place, but we have to take that hard look. Like, I actually have to like be strong in these other areas so I feel comfortable to make these moves in the classroom. So to me, like, an example of like what you might want to do to kind of like, think about whether these things are working is going like, I can make things work better if I get stronger in this like hidden area. It doesn't sound hidden because you're teaching mathematics, but I mean, we all assume, and I did this for a long time, I assumed I was really great at math and I didn't have to like think about my mathematics, but I was that procedural teacher. So when I started to learn the models, the strategies, it became much more fluent for me in the classroom to do a number talk, to get students up and utilize building thinking classrooms on a impactful basis. So it's like, my big takeaway about thinking about does it work is to be, where can I be the most intentional and get the most impact? And that has to do with measuring, but also has to do with self-reflection. So there's a lot that goes into that question, which is, I think, when we come back full circle, that's got to be the fundamental question of mathematics.
I love it. Friends, what are you taking away from this episode? For me, those bullet holes, the ones that are so obvious, they're easy for us to identify and to try to fix and patch up. What we want you to do is really look for the parts that are hard to see, are hard to notice, because that's where you're going to see some true impact and change. So hopefully you've taken something from this. Reach out to us on social media. Leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you found this to be helpful and you want to help this show reach even greater audience sizes like you, the Math Moment Maker community. So head on over to makemathmoments.com/episode. I don't know what this is.
It is episode 296, Kyle.
There it is.
Kyle. Folks, and also if you kind of want to run your current math classroom through an audit, like get an opinion of like what's going on here under the hood. Or maybe your district program, like the professional development program, the action plans, the vision that you've created. You have a vision, right? If you also want an audit of the program, head on over to makemathmoments.com/report. And you can go through our assessment here. We'll walk you through some questions to basically audit, your program in the classroom if you're a classroom teacher, but there's a version for the district leader listening right now too, to kind of help them think about what they're doing in their math program, because that audit is a great way to start uncovering where these bullet holes are and where these non-bullet holes are. The hidden holes, the non-reclaimed holes. But you can head on over to makemathmoments.com/report. You'll get your report there to see where you are and what you can start fixing.
All right, Math Moment Makers, until next time, I'm Kyle Pierce.
And I'm John Orr.
High fives for us.
And a big high five for you.